chonichinam chetanas chetananam eko bahunam yo vidadati kaman tamatmastam yenu pashanti diraha tesham shanti shashvati netaresham om shantihi shantihi shantihi. That one, the eternal among non-eternal things, the intelligence of the most intelligent ones, who, though ever one, nevertheless fulfills the desires of the many. That one, the wise souls realize, is dwelling in their very self. To them belong peace, and to none else. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us, may Brahman sustain us, may Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. Good morning. We are coming to you live here from Hawaii at about 7 in the morning after our 1 hour of meditation. And we are here in the SRV Association's ashram. And we have warmed up the vibrations not only with meditation but with the spoken word, having opened with our peace chant and a chant out of the Katha Upanishad. And now we will enter into what is formally and traditionally called Satsang, or discussing the nature of the self, or inquiring into the nature of truth. And we do that as a divine preoccupation amongst the devotees of the Lord and Mother of the Universe, and also in the spirit of non-duality or Advaita. There's no reason why God with form and God without form can't coexist, since they obviously do at all times. It's just that reality beyond form is most subtle. Anuranian is the word in Sanskrit. Most subtle, or subtlemost of all. And most auspicious, the auspicious of the auspicious. Sarva Mangala Mangalye, as we say in our chants. And so in that atmosphere, we always acknowledge the supreme underlying substratum, or the divine reality, which we will talk about also this afternoon at our class at 2:30, which will also be live streamed. We're speaking on the subject of Asparsha Yoga, or non-touch yoga, basically coming from Gaudapada's Karika on the Mandukya Upanishad. So very profound subjects we take up here at SRV Ashram. One place where you can come here in Hawaii, also in San Francisco, and in Portland, Oregon, our 3 chapters, our 3 ashrams, where we discuss deeply the wisdom of the East, of India, and other traditions and religions too that play into it for us in a universal sense. So with that as a sort of preamble and introduction, we can enter into formal satsang in a rather informal way. We don't want to be to make it too sterile. We want to discuss this spirit of truth with a warm and welcoming heart and an open mind that leaves room for all sacred traditions, and leaves room for questions from different quarters too, people who are watching, who can write in and type in questions to us, and also people who are here present this morning, who are ashram inmates, as we call them, who are doing the austerity of truth and abiding in dharmic life, trying to live a spiritual life in the midst of the world. Now, some of the questions that have come in today, I see one from Portland, Oregon, and one here locally, and an anonymous one. I might as well take these in order. This devotee writes in with this question: can you please clarify the experiential process of utilizing the tanmatras to go beyond the physical realm, prakriti, and the gunas? All right, so before you turn off your computers, because you've already encountered 3 or 4 difficult Sanskrit words, hang on, because we will describe those to you, define them for you. They're not really all that hard to understand. But the question goes on: is it a constant, unrelenting process of disidentifying with the stuff of the experience and seeing all as a projection of consciousness? For instance, is the experience of sound vibration dissolving into the idea of audibility just one step in a non-ending process of separating ourselves out from nature? Well, you can already see speaking of nature, you can already see the deep thinking of the Vedantic process that goes on in some of these philosophical and cosmological processes, things that the mind has to come to grips with in order to know itself and also to know the universe which it's in. Sri Krishna describes that kshetra and kshetragya, that is, the knower of the field and its knower. And that's a chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, one of the yogas really that is named in the Bhagavad Gita, that the soul must become aware of itself in its own surrounding and then analyze that, which is what we're doing here in satsang, but we're putting the emphasis more on the soul rather than on nature. In daily life, we're out in nature all the time, and we pretty much forget ourselves with all the display of the 5 elements in different permutations everywhere: trees and water and sky and wind and earth and flowers. All those things of prakriti, which is one of the words that was used here. Prakriti is nature. In our tradition, though, we have to make sure we repeat many times that nature is with form and nature is also formless. That is, there's a manifest side of nature which we see all around us with our senses, experience with our senses, and then there's an unmanifested part of nature out of which form comes. And when you question here is talking about the tanmatras. That's the first difficult word that comes up in Sanskrit. Those are the subtle elements which evolve the gross elements of earth, air, fire, water, and ether. We have to be a little bit careful with our wording. In fact, this whole question really sort of begs Advaitic clarification, because it's all talking about processes, and the practitioner can get so much into processes that it forgets the goal, or forgets the end of the whole thing. This question reminds me rather of somebody who cuts down a forest and builds a fire with some of the wood, builds a house, brings gas in through pipes to have fire in the kitchen, and from a nearby river cuts a channel for water to come into the house, and basically gets all involved in the process of the 5 elements. But in the end, what does he do? He goes and sits in the house. He himself has built a house for himself, and now he just sits there in comfort with everything under control and in a nice orderly form. So that's my overall answer to this question, is don't forget that you're the one that is going through this process. You don't want to get drawn out too much by the cosmology. In fact, one of the second questions here has to do with that, learning cosmology. So we have to always keep the highest goal as Buddha said, paragatam, in mind. Our third eye fixed upon that, rather than our two eyes fixed upon all the externals and the processes and the methods and the evolution and the production of things. Those are all words that are rather suspicious to the Advaitist, because there's nothing changing. There's nothing that's not Brahman. This question also reminds me of the way Swami Vivekananda would often treat questions like this. Many people would come and say, well, they would hear those great statements of the Mahavakyas of Vedanta, the Upanishads and so forth, and they'd say, well, all this is God then, I don't have to worry, all this is God. And Swami Vivekananda would take a rather raised eyebrow view of such a statement. In fact, one of the Hale sisters once wrote him a letter, and he wrote back saying something to the effect of, you wrong my doctrines, you mar my doctrines, wronging, balking. I never taught such queer thought that all is God. Unseeming talking. But this I say, remember, pray, that God is real, all else is nothing. The real me is none but He, and never, never matter changing. So, and rather than saying all is Brahman, he would come forth and say, God is real, all else is nothing. It's a much more clarifying way of approaching it, because when people say all this is God, all this is God, how can matter be God? And it's insentient. The real me is none but He, and never, never matter changing. So Swamiji would always come back and with those correcting processes to our mind, so that people would not jump to the conclusion of non-duality, jump from the lowest step to the highest step, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa used to say, and then never know what the middle steps consist of. So the cosmology is important, the philosophy is important. The most important thing is the real me, is none but He, never, never matter changing. So when you're involved in processes, you're involved in prakriti, nature. You're involved in unmanifested prakriti too. You just don't see it. It's where you go after death. Forms disappear back into the formless nature, and then they come out of formless nature and take form again. But they can't do that by themselves, because prakriti, according to Samkhya Yoga, is insentient. It can't move by itself. It has to have an animating power. Prana is that on the level of energy, and mind is that on the level of thought. There's animating power in all of this. Nature can't do things by itself. So in and out of this manifesting and unmanifesting process, the real me, which is none but He, sits on and watches those processes go back and forth from form to formlessness. A person who gets very adept at that is a seer, and knows that he's birthless and deathless. He sees everything coming into form, sees everything disappearing out of form, but when he measures the end result of it, nothing changed. And besides, he also notices that these cycles are going on continually, that when form dissolves back into formlessness, nothing's lost, and it just comes back again, doesn't it? It's like Krishna is saying in the Gita, 2 things you need to know, Arjuna. If you can know the soul as being unchanging, that's best of all. But if you can't yet know that, you can't come to the understanding that everything is pure and perfect and unchanging at all times, no matter what the appearances say to you, then you should know that everything that dies is born again, and everything that's born goes to death again. So there's these constant cycles going on and on constantly. So there's the Advaitic view on one hand, the self is pure and perfect and unchanging. And on the other hand, there's the apparent coming and going of cycles, which you'll only be able to know if you stand back as witness. If you get involved in the process, then you won't know that. So with those 2 qualifying elucidations or clarifications, then taking this question literally is that when the tanmatras go beyond, when you use the tanmatras to go beyond the physical realm, the idea is that you become aware of the tanmatras, that the gross elements, which are earth, air, fire, water, and ether, come out of the subtle elements. It's their natural evolutionary process. And when they reverse the process, or when you reverse the process, they go back into the tanmatras, and that's how the gross elements disappear into subtle elements, just like these objects here disappear into the dream tonight. When you go into dream, these very objects become dream objects to you. Now the Advaitas say that there's no difference between the two states, waking and dreaming. You're working with objects here which have been projected by consciousness all of a sudden. You should probably know that. The Diamond Sutra states it, the Diamond Cutter Sutra, the Mahamudra states it, the Advaita Vedanta states it, Mahayana Buddhism states it. You can't go anywhere in Eastern philosophy and look in any system where it doesn't state that truth. And so becoming aware of this process of change is what's the essence here. So you should be able to dissolve the gross elements into the tanmatras in your mind in a thrice. And go on with the process. Dissolve those back into mind, and the mind into the intellect, and the intellect into the cosmic mind, and cosmic mind into Om, or into the Word, or into an unmanifested prakriti, and unmanifested prakriti back into the Word. There are sentient and insentient sides to all of these inner processes that are going on, that are formulating your thoughts, and that help your thoughts then formulate the elements, and the subtle elements then formulate the gross elements. This is a whole cosmology back inside of you that you must become very conversant with. And the main essence here is not to get lost in the process, is to know that you're the one that's doing the dissolving, and you're the one that's doing the projecting. I mean, that's pretty much the end statement right there. If you know that, then you become very versatile and with this process. And so I have to say that about the question. He further asks, is it a constant unrelenting process of disidentifying with the stuff of this experience and seeing all as a projection of consciousness? Yes. Just simply in one word, yes. You must identify with consciousness itself, and therefore you're going to have to see everything that's in the way of the self as a projection of your own doing. Neither Maya nor nature is responsible for it. That they're insentient, how can they be? The Tantrists say Maya is insentient. Samkhya says Prakriti is insentient. Do you need to know anything more? One more thing you need to know. What's sentient then here? And the answer would be you, yourself, the Atman, the Buddha nature, however you want to put it. That's the sentient element in the quotient. And so you identify with that. And it makes all the process of cosmology go by very simply. It's just that by taking all of these steps inward to the kingdoms of heaven within you, then you come closer and closer to that self, to that great self. Not to the ego self, you'll come closer to that too, but you'll begin to see more and more through it, to the great self, to that which is the Buddha nature, the Atman underlying, as we just said. Now, another aspect of the question is, for instance, is the experience of sound vibration dissolving into the idea of audibility just one step in the non-ending process of separating ourselves out from nature? The words here I'm seeing here are unrelenting process and non-ending process. Let's maybe clarify that first, is the processes and cycles are unending, no doubt. They're unoriginated, they go on forever, but you want to still them. That is, you yourself are not involved in any processes. The self itself is stationary, stable, without movement, without thought, without birth, without death, without suffering, without mental projection, without creation, preservation, and destruction. You've gone beyond the Trinity when you get to the self, the great self with a capital S. And that's where you want to sit, like that man in his new house, with all the five elements all at your beck and call, and your disposal. You may attach and detach at will. And there's where the yogi has it in spades over all of the beings, because they attach and they remain attached to the body, to life. This thirst for life forever quench, as Vivekananda says. The yogi has quenched that. Now he just sits amidst all the things, the cycles that are going on, in a detached witness consciousness, viewing their movement and knowing the movement to be non-actual. Nothing moves, nothing's produced, nothing is destroyed. The same old axioms you're getting all the time when you read the Upanishads, when you read the Gita, when you read the Brahma Sutras, when you read the Adhyatma Ramayana. Whoever's saying it, Ram, Krishna, Chaitanya, Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, whoever's saying it, you're getting the same simple truth again and again, but now you have a chance to actually live it, to live in it, and show yourself up to be the unchanging, immutable self amidst changing matter. That's why I started chanting this morning, Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam. The very first few words of that Kata Upanishad sloka say that one is the eternal among non-eternal things. It's the intelligence of the most intelligent ones. So even in the first several words, the eternal among non-eternal things, you have the essence right there. You hardly have to go on with any more slokas or even finish out the sloka to know that simple truth. So when it comes down to certain specific aspects of the dissolution of the mindstream process is what we're talking about, then you're talking about dissolving sound into audibility and fire into luminosity and water into the sense of taste and earth into the sense of smell. These are all called connections. Make sure that they're only connections to you. It may seem a big step to most people because they haven't connected their senses to the elements yet. They don't know that there's an actual inner subtle connection between the two. They just take each sense and each element separately. It's a fragmented way of looking at life. Now I'm seeing, what am I seeing? See, but they don't ever say to themselves, what I'm seeing is a projection of my own thought process where the eyes are connected to the mind. And therefore, when they look out, they see according to the light of the sun, see, the light of fire, the light of a lamp. See, without the sun, then all of these terrestrial actions would be unviewable, impossible. That's one of the verses in the Hasta Amlaka Stotram. So, but the light of consciousness is what causes these eyes to see. Not the light of the sun, the light of consciousness. So there you go to another Vedantic sloka, right? Na tatra suryabhati na chandra tarakom. It's not by the light of the moon or the light of the sun. It's the light of consciousness that allows the moon its light and allows the sun its light. That allows the billion suns in the night nocturnal sky to shine. It's the light of consciousness that gives them their light. So always jumping to the source is the non-dual side of this Advaita Vedanta, it's called, which we're talking about this afternoon at class. So if you use words like unrelenting process and words like non-ending process, then it sounds like you might be identifying too much with the process. That's sort of what I'm getting from this question, whether or not the questioner really intended that. So my answer is really focusing more on do the process, but always know the one who's engaging in the process. Keep the emphasis there. And then you'll be free of identifying too much with these processes. You can just dissolve ether into this sense of hearing, you see, easily. Didn't my words start? Didn't they end? That's it, right there. They had a vibration, the vibration came to an end. They were projected and then they were dissolved. And I'm doing it again and again, aren't I? Every time I start a sentence and end a sentence. So let it happen. Let it all dissolve. In the dissolution process, there's always a residue. It's like a homa fire ceremony. You offer yogurt into and milk and leaves and butter and things into the fire, and the residue comes off, you see, and that's what the deity is hanging around in the second ether or taking in that residue, you see, as an offering to them. Burnt offerings, it's called. in the puja. So they're getting satisfied by these offerings, you see. So you should also get satisfying by these offerings that you're doing, these processes, one into the other. You're satiating yourself for all time finally, because you're making the connections between the senses and the elements, so you'll never have to come out into the realm of the elements again with any desire. You can come out free of desire. It might be a strange thought to the people of these days and times, but yes, to be free of desire is a ultimate position, and it gives you the ultimate bliss. Why are you only getting temporary happiness from your association with the objects? Why aren't you getting unending bliss with your association with the objects? Well, that's the difference between somebody who's made these connections and who does the process in and out as easily as sleight of hand, as nature or Maya makes nature appear, makes objects appear. You yourself are involved in that process. You're the animating power that is taking the qualities of Maya and the material, the content, the stuff, he says here, of nature, and making it congeal. So make it dissolve now. Just congeal it and leave it, because then you're stuck in it. But every day practice dissolving it. That's what you do tonight in sleep anyway, so why not do it consciously in meditation? That's the ideology and the meaning behind the dissolving the mind stream process. Everyone's doing it in different ways. So, yes, go ahead and experience the sound vibrations dissolving back into the audibility, the idea of audibility. See, and then go further from there. Take the idea of audibility and dissolve it back into the great mind and add it back into the greatest vibration of all, called Om. That's really where you'll find the ultimate audible experience. The ultimate experience is beyond the two ears. We know there's something beyond the two eyes because it's the sixth center, but there's also something beyond the two ears, and that's going to be that experience of Om, or the unstruck sound. The only thing about the unstruck sound is by the time you hear it, so-called hear it, then you will be the unseen seer. You'll be the inactive agent. You'll be the inactive actor. See, because you take all the five senses, or whatever they do, and you take them to the ultimate, don't you? Unseen seer, unstruck sound, inactive actor, and so forth. That's you. See? That's what you end up with. So accent that in the process of, don't make it such an unending and dallying around, like sticking a stick in a mud puddle and stirring up the silt. You'll see it'll take forever for the silt to sink. Just touch it lightly, and then get into a non-touch position around it as you dissolve it all back to its original state, which is you. You are the origin. Turn and gaze into your own original face, as one of the lines of the Songs of India says. Now, that's a good entrance into this next anonymous question. When the realization of non-duality is the highest and the goal of philosophical inquiry, why is there such an emphasis on learning cosmology? Besides, how true can cosmology be when all cultures have different ones? Well, let me treat the last question first. How real can Italian food be when there's French food, or German food, or American food, or Hawaiian food? In other words, why are you worried about that? You're a Vedantist, you're a Samkhya, you're a yogi. Why are you questioning about other cultures? This is the one you're in. This is the tradition that you're following. So get down and follow it. My teacher used to say that all the time. Sometimes he'd yell it at us. Follow the tradition. Why are you worrying about other religions or other traditions? Why are you worrying about other foods when you have perfect food right in front of you? See? So that's the first thing you should say. Are we Romans? Are we Greeks? Are we practicing Roman and Greek philosophy? The West is already doing that. That is our philosophy in America. What you see here is pretty much what came from Rome and Greece. But now we're borrowing a wisdom tradition from India. It's called Vedanta. It's come amongst us. And the beautiful thing about Vedanta is that it's the most ancient and the most long-standing. We can take it back to thousands and thousands of years before, what to speak of Rome and Greece, before Christ. So what we're standing on here is a solid foundation of Samkhya, its 24 cosmic principles. And who has classified them like that? Where have you ever gone anywhere, in any philosophy, in any country that's ever had a soul like Lord Copula that's come forward and said, oh, here's what your universe is made of, inner and outer, with all the mainstays and all the steps and all the evolutes and all the vikritis and all the prakritis and the purusha besides. Who's ever said that to you? Only in Mother India, which is called the mother of all religions, do you find a cosmology like that. And one that you can follow 10, 12,000 years later without any doubt, without any faltering, without any wavering, without any balking. You mar my doctrines, wronging, balking. See, I never taught such queer thought that always got unseeming talking. Well, this unseeming talking is that this cosmology is not real. It's a process. It's an evolution. It's a projection. The whole purpose of it is to see it as being a movement inside of a great soul that doesn't move. The great self is completely actionless, completely motiveless, completely desireless. It doesn't even desire to play, to sport. It's stationary and happy in its own non-dual essence. And if it ever looks out at all on what's going on outside in the realm of nature and Maya, it looks out there only as a detached witness. Sakshi Bhutam, the witness of all phenomena. Because if I begin to identify with the phenomena, then I'm in trouble. I'm in lifetimes of trouble. I'm dragged from birth to death and death to birth. So, taking the Advaitic platform, foundation first, then you enter into a cosmology to find out the nature of the true self. That's what Satsang is, right? We're in the inquiry into the nature of the true self. But how can we know what the true self is until we know what it's not? So we take the 5 elements. Is the true self that? No. Why? Because they change. Because they're objectified. See? When I'm the eternal subject, those are objects. See? My teacher, the scriptures, have told me that I'm the eternal subject. I'm not an object. I cannot be objectified. Reality cannot be objectified. Brahman cannot be objectified. And Brahman is Allah, and Allah is the Almighty Father, and that's Buddha nature. None of that can be turned into an object. Nature can't form it. In fact, it's the other way around. Nature has decided to congeal around it. Not only has the congealing power in it, but it is the congealer itself. It is the essence. Everything seems to attach to it, like iron filings around a magnet. Well, some of these iron filings are air, earth, fire, water, and ether, touching, tasting, seeing, smelling, and walking and locomotion and procreation, all the different things that go on. They've listed them all as cosmic principles. And that's what you are learning, a cosmology. You learn it why? So you know what you're not. Why? So you can know who you are. It's that simple. It's a 3-step process. Everything good comes in 3s. So when you take up the 5 elements for meditation, alambanas, yoga calls it, or you take up the 5 senses for meditation. Why do I see? What is it that I hear? Like from my teacher right now, see. Then you do that with lightness, with elation, with joy, with appreciation for the fact that somebody came along and did the homework for you. So now all you have to do is follow. Be a good follower. And take up one of these great philosophies, one of these great cosmologies, and follow it to the hilt. and then you'll know. You'll find out in the interim, who am I? You'll find out the answer to that question, the classic question. So the question has been put: when realization of non-duality is the highest and the goal of philosophical inquiry, why is there such an emphasis on learning cosmology? So, and then there are so many cosmologies. How true can cosmology be when all other cultures also have their cosmology? So I've answered those two questions. Again, that final one being select one and follow it. You might as well follow one that's ancient, that is timeless, and that has everything well documented, like the 24 cosmic principles of Lord Kapila, called Sankhya, which was borrowed by every other philosophical system in India, borrowed from Samkhya, one of the earliest, and other religions have borrowed from it too. Everywhere, even up to the New Age philosophy of America. So what is real and what is good in that, which there's not very much, that's very abiding and very true, has been borrowed from Samkhya and Vedanta, and from those great statements. Those great statements were realized by practicing a cosmology, by coming to know who you are, by finding out what you're not. Iti iti cannot be gained without neti neti. Iti iti means all this. God is real, all else is nothing. How did I find that out? By practicing neti neti, not this, not this. I am not the 5 elements, I'm not the 5 senses, I'm not the 5 tanmatras, so I should dissolve them, shouldn't I? If I'm not those things, why shouldn't I dissolve them? Or should I hang out them and pretend that I'm those things? Or my pretension pretty soon becomes fact. It's like, now I think I am a material being living in a material world. See? So I've got it all backwards. And I never know the bliss of the self. I never know the formless nature of reality. I never know the great siddhantas, the great conclusions of Vedanta and Yoga and Samkhya and Tantra and Buddhism, other great systems of philosophy. I never know those things because I got so hung up out there in the process somewhere. So let's continue the process inward and find the validation for it. We are that validation. All of this has come from us. And every great scripture has described that in one way or another, at least in India. And many of them in other traditions and other countries have also touched on that subject. Now a final question here for our satsang. Some years ago, in reading a classic text on the Western Hermetic tradition, I was introduced to the idea that for universal vibration to occur, there must also be a universal static or stable base against which it moves. Shortly thereafter, I heard you give what seemed like precisely the same teaching. Please speak on vibration, and how does this relate to pratyabhigya, or self-recognition? So you can see by the nature of the questions here that those of us who are occupying the climes and realms of Vedanta, particularly Advaita, come up with some very deep questions, and you can see where their minds are thinking. It's a very telling, very wonderful fact that people get out of the superficial level of the mind and the mundane human convention that's always preoccupying the mind, and the silly surface talk that always goes on, and begin to put their minds deep towards the element of truth, and using the higher wisdom to do so, because lower wisdom will end you up in the world, but higher wisdom will end you up in the kingdoms of heaven within you. So pointing this out because I'm very happy to be fielding such deep philosophical questions. These aren't just words. These are come from the deep thinking process of souls that have probably spent many lifetimes thinking about such things and seeking for answers for them. So here we're back to the subject of vibration, which is rather underlying in all of these 3 questions, and also bringing up that teaching of pratyabhigya, or self-recognition. Now, the first paragraph of the sentence, or the first sentence of this question, has to do with the universal static or stable base that's underlying everything. And there we go back to Samkhya again, and we find out these 6 truths of Purusha. One of them, that is the 6 truths of the soul, that are called the proofs of the soul. So these philosophical systems, Samkhya connected to Vedanta and Tantra, have looked into the soul and come up with this sort of condensation of certain facts about the soul. Soul with a capital S here, we're talking about the supreme soul, not the transmigrating soul, that's the mind. We make a distinction between that. In fact, we make a distinction between the supreme soul, which is birthless and deathless and beyond vibration, and then the ahamkara, or the individual soul, the individualized soul, or the ego, and then the mind and the brain. There's also a distinction between those two things in Vedanta. So, having been informed about those divisions, you could call them divisions of consciousness, although, of course, the divisions are going to disappear when you realize consciousness in the ultimate sense. Then we look at this underlying foundation, the subtle substratum of everything. That's one of the 6 proofs of the Purusha, is that the dancer needs a stage, as they say. And all of this needs a stage in which to move upon, which to dance upon, in which to enact its life play. See? So that subtle foundation, well, you could say for plants and everything is the earth, but for thoughts it's the mind, that subtle foundation, and then for the mind and other things like that, the most subtle substratum would be that soul, or Purusha. That's a word used in Samkhya times. Purusha was soul, Prakriti was nature, and the two were 2 different realities. So that word Purusha, define it roughly as the dweller in the city of 9 gates. Purusha would be the indweller in the city of 9 gates, which would be these senses, these apertures, out of which energy comes and into which everything also is taken, like as food. So Purusha is that dweller in the city of 9 gates. Or you could say the dweller in the city of 5 elements and objects and so forth. So it's the indweller, or the underlying substratum of everything. And Prakriti, of course, would be all of that which comes out of it naturally as an emanation, or as a projection. As an emanation, if you're a realized soul; as a projection, if maybe you've gotten caught in processes like we were just saying, instead of always realizing yourself as the projector itself. Not the projection, but the projector. So, first of all, the questioner informs us of that presence of the underlying substratum. Very important. Then wants me to speak a little bit more on vibration and how it relates to self-recognition. Pratyabhikya is a very powerful word. They say that remembering is half the battle. So forgetfulness has been the cause of our suffering. We could call it ignorance. Another word for it is ignorance, and Father of Yoga calls that avidya as the first klesha, the first problem in self-recognition. Remembering yourself is that you've simply forgotten. Don't forget to remember, as we say sometimes in our songs. Durganam Bulona, 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 one song sings in Bengali. See, don't forget to remember Sri Durga's divine and sacred name, as that'll always help you recall your divine nature, how you're her child. You're the child of the Universal Mother. So, all of this goes on by vibration. So, ears in our tradition, for instance, the subtlest of the 5 senses, right? Ear is associated with ether, and vibration floats across the ethers and hits the eardrums, and then that is immediately a conduit straight to the heart, or straight to the mind, hopefully to both. Hopefully what you hear strikes your mind and warms your heart. And that means what you're going to be listening to has to be sacred scripture, Shruti. So Shruti first, and then Yukti, and then Anubhava. You hear first by vibration, and then you take that vibration, that is a gross vibration, gross not meaning, just meaning the opposite of subtle. And then you take that gross vibration and you take it in further, and that vibration becomes a subtle vibration in your mind. And you begin to contemplate it. That's yukti. So shruti first to hear, yukti next to contemplate, or to rationalize, to think about. Nirvitarka samadhi. It's this kind of rationalization. And you're arguing. It has argumentation with it, you see. Savitarka, Nirvitarka, samadhis, those two have argumentation and have rationalization going on in them. And so that has to do with vibration. You're posing devil's advocate with the things you hear. You're pro and conning it all the time, you see. Seeing its qualities, seeing its lacks, see. And then coming up with a distillation process that gives you a final conclusion, a siddhanta. And that becomes your wisdom. All based on vibration, isn't it? And it started out with the spoken word. In Vedanta, in Advaita Vedanta, those are the two ways in which wisdom is seen. First as spoken, and then as supreme. The supreme wisdom, of course, is realization itself, pratyabhigya. It's after recognition has already been gained. Recognition is in Tantra also one of the most powerful of all words. To recognize the nature of something is akin to truth, especially when it comes to your own self. But if you can, sort of play on words here, if you can recognize the nature of nature, that is the five elements, then you can dissolve them back inside of yourself, because that's where they came from. You see how the process is all connected, interconnected. So vibration may be just one of the ways in which we understand knowledge, wisdom, and truth. But I would say probably it's one of the most efficacious ways to do it. That's why the mystics are always hearing the sound of Om inside of them. Others might see light, and that's the other very valid and powerful way to realize truth and to realize the self. Through hearing and through seeing, those two senses have the most power in them. And so to see is to believe, they say, but to hear is to realize. So you take that after you've understood that ether and hearing have a relationship, and fire, sun, and seeing have a relationship, then you can utilize to the fullest capacity the connection of those two things. And that's all happening with the sixth sense back in your mind. And the five senses, like five white horses, are attached to the chariot of the mind. Now you should be holding the reins, the five reins called prana. And you should be the charioteer. You're the will. You're driving that chariot along the road that you want it to take. That is the road to truth. So everything involved in that process is vibration, isn't it? Science has told you that the objects are vibrating. Sometimes as fast as a billionth of a second, these particles are vibrating in objects. Okay, take it further then. Take it deeper. Don't get a death grasp on the atomic particle. You want to know what the atmic particle is, not just the atomic particle. So in order to know the atmic particle, you must go the next step in from the senses. And that would be from the elements. That would be the senses, wouldn't it? So now you have the senses are vibrating. There's a vibration when you taste something with water as the base, right? So you're tasting, that's a vibration. It's translating something back to your mind through vibration. Thought is at the hub of that, but you haven't gotten that deep yet. So that's a certain level of vibration. Now the next level of vibration are the thundering, from the thundering hooves of the five horses. That's a vibration, isn't it? So now what you have is the reins of prana. Now you're getting to a very subtle vibration when you talk about the word prana. Tanmatras mentioned here in this first question, the five of them, It's a quintuplication process. And the 5 forms of prana go with the 5 senses, go with the 5 elements. It's all called quintuplication process. 5s are, if you can just get that much understanding under your belt, then you can pretty much classify the 25 cosmic principles, if you want to put it that way. Sometimes 24, sometimes 26, depending on what system you look at. But there's a lot of reason, and good reason, to say 25, because the mind is also 5-fold if you add in cosmic mind. So anyway, before you get to such a deep, or let's call it very subtle, extremely subtle vibration, like cosmic mind, then you're working your way inward to find these five reins of prana, which are connected to the 5 horses of the senses. So that's the vibration of prana is nadi, isn't it? It's running through nerves. If you study Patanjali's yoga, then you find out about the nadis, the nerves that are running through, not just the gross nerves running through the body, and not just the rivers and currents of wind that are running across Earth, because those are channels, nerves too. Tides, wind currents, rivers running through valleys. These are all nerves, you see, of a virat form, of a gross body. But now you're in the realm of the subtle bodies. There are nerves there too, and they're running by the hundreds and thousands through the internal landscape. 3 main ones are there: the Sushumna, the Ida, and the Pingala. Right? Those are the Kundalini system's way of describing. That's all based in vibration. Vibration is at the very hub of all of it. You are vibrating. Everything is vibrating. Vibration might as well be life. But when you come to the understanding of and the recognition of pratyabhigya, of prana, then you're a yogi. You have the means to be a yogi or a yogini. Now you know the secret of life. Life force is all based on prana. Man does not live by bread alone. He lives by this prana. And that prana lives by something else. So you see how it goes. We could take this into a class because the subject is so profound. But all 3 of these questions, anyway, have been pretty much mentioning and skirting that subject of vibration, vritti, forms. And then, so if you took the prana deeper, you would go to thought forms, wouldn't you? Vrittis. There are vibrations in my mind. And they're subtler yet, thought forms. The stuff, as this one questioner said, the stuff of vibration, the stuff of identification, the stuff of the power that helps you dissolve everything in a good meditation or in a good deep sleep. Is it outward going power and inward going power? See, it seems like 2 different things, but they're really one, aren't they? And they're based in, your ability to use them is based in your recognition of them. So that brings in the word pratyabhigya. And the very same principle will also apply deeper when you can identify the mind with the cosmic mind and recognize their oneness. And even deeper when you can merge the Trinity into Om. See? So the very same principle that you're using outwardly to recognize the oneness of all these things, their connections, will be the very same principle that finally gets you into recognition of the self. Atma vichara, that's what we're looking at now. See, inquiry into the nature of self so that we can, once again, become the self, that self which we always are, always were, and always will be. More about this then later in this afternoon's class. I hope you'll all come and tune in. Let's end here with a quick chant. Om Tachnayo, Om Tachnayo Ravrini Mahe, Gatung Yakyaya, Gatung Yenu Pataye, Daivi Swastirastu Naha, Swastir Manusebhyaha, Urdhvam Jagatu Bhesajam, Sangno Astu Dvipade Sang Chatushpate, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we make an offering into the Great Self. May we dissolve all into the Great Self. May we always delight in this offering. May we always revere the Lord and Mother of all sacrifices. May divine blessings be upon us. May peace be unto the entire human race. May healing, well-being, and prosperity also then abide among us. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om Hari.